Soldering. Soldering is a process where a metal alloy called a solder is heated to its melting point. The solder is then used to form a bond between two pieces of metal. Tubing. Hollow tubing is mostly used in jewelry for shapes that have the same section all the way around. There are companies specializing in this who cater to the jewelry industry. Standard sections are round, oval, square, rectangular, and triangular. They can also be personalized into other shapes you desire. The metal tubes can be bent into the forms you need, like bangles, link chains, rings, and more. They can also be twisted around themselves, creating rope-like effects. The wall thickness of the tubes vary. One of the real perks with this technique is that they can be made very thin and light, while still remaining strong. Like we explored in the chapter about bracelets, there is something called flex tubing. This type of tube is not fully closed, but has an almost invisible cutting line that allows the tube to flex open and closed, all without a mechanism. Electroforming. Electroforming is a process to form metals through electrodeposition. It begins with turning the shape you want to create into a model called a mandrel. To keep it simple, the mandrel is placed in a bath where precious metal is deposited over it until the desired thickness is achieved. The mandrel is then melted away or chemically dissolved, leaving the hollow precious shell. With electroforming, you can achieve very light shapes that are still pretty strong. Something that's very difficult to do with casting. This makes it perfect for voluminous earrings, brooches, or chains where you want to achieve a big look without being too heavy. You can even go as thin as 0.12 millimeters. But going that thin, the piece becomes very fragile, so it's better not to make surfaces below 0.25 to 0.3. One of the downsides with this technique is that objects made with very thin metal tend to dent easily, making it less suitable for rings or bracelets that bump into things when worn. A second thing is that you can't achieve really sharp edges with electroforming, making it better for rounded sculptural shapes. Laser cutting. Laser cutting is just what it sounds like. It's cutting with a laser. It's perfect for piercing patterns or shapes in metal with exceptional precision, and is especially popular for cutting thin sheets of metal. To use this technique, a computer-generated drawing is transmitted to the machine controlling the laser. Stamping. Metal stamping is a cold forming process that can be done in different ways. To create a specific volume, you use something called dies and stamping presses to transform flat sheets of metal into different shapes. There is a positive and a negative part of the dies. A metal sheet is placed in between them, and with the extreme pressure created by the stamping press, the metal takes the shape of the die. The perks of stamping is that you can create shapes with very thin metal that remain strong. Making a stamping die is usually costly, so this process is suitable for larger productions in order to be cost-effective. A limitation with stamping is that you can't do shapes that are more than half, meaning that you won't be able to pull them out of the stamp. These illustrations show what I mean. In order to create a full three-dimensional shape, you need to create two stamps, one for the front and one for the back. If you want to stamp a logo, carat weight, or a small design in your jewel, you can do it with something called a punzone. The punzone has a shape in relief at the end of a metal bar. You can simply stamp your jewel by placing the punzone at the desired area and hit it with a hammer. Embossing. Embossed metal has a relief motive, created on sheets drawn through male and female roller dies with a combination of heat and pressure. Granulation. Granulation is a 5,000-year-old jewelry making technique, originating in Sumer, which was the first civilization in southern Mesopotamia. In granulation, a plain metal surface is covered with metal spheres, usually very tiny. In antiquity, the spheres were added to the surface one by one with a glue made from, you won't believe it, natural fruit juice. Can you imagine? Today, this kind of manual labor isn't cost-effective, not even a bit. So most jewelers who use it either apply spheres of larger dimensions, or they create a mold from a granulated model, so they can cast the piece with the balls already in place. The downside of casting granulation is that it loses some of its definition. In antique Etruscan jewelry, you'll find some amazing examples that are sure to get your creative juices flowing. It's not common in commercial jewelry nowadays, but it's a technique where you can create really cool effects. Besides, it's such an important part of jewelry history that it's good for you to know about it. In contemporary jewelry, referencing the past is of common practice, and something that customers appreciate if done in a nice, modern way. Filigree. Filigree is another really ancient technique, dating back to 3000 BC. It still lives on today, mostly seen in Indian, Portuguese, and Asian jewelry. It's made with tiny twisted gold or silver threads, soldered together in lacy motifs with light and airy looks. Finishing. There are many different ways to treat the surface of your jewels. Here's some major techniques. Satin finish. The surface of the metal is treated to get a soft, opaque satin look. Brushed finish. The surface is brushed with regular or irregular strokes. Diamantatura. The surface is poked in a way that creates a sparkly effect that resembles a pavé. High shine. Engravings. You can do lots and lots of interesting things with this technique, from writing to ornamental or figurative designs or patterns. Hammered. Enamel. Enameling is one of the oldest forms of surface decoration, used to add color to jewelry. The tradition is as old as ancient Greece. Throughout history, different techniques have been developed. Let's explore the most famous ones you should know about. Cloisonné. This is a technique where thin wires of fine silver and gold are used to outline a design, which is then filled with enamel. Champlevé. In this technique, motifs are made in the metal by etching, engraving, or chiseling. Layers of enamel are then built up until they raise slightly above the surface of the metal. The enamel is then fired and polished. Plique-à-jour. This is an enameling technique that was popular during the Art Nouveau period. In this technique, the enamel isn't applied to metal. Instead, an enamel powder is applied to shapes on a thin sheet of copper foil or mica and then etched away, creating a stained glass-like effect. Ronde-bosse. This is a technique where the enamel is applied to three-dimensional forms. This practice was first used in the 15th century during the Renaissance. Guilloché. This is a beautiful decorative technique, where patterns are engraved with a machine onto an underlying material. Translucent enamel is then applied on top, letting the intricate surface pattern show through. The most exclusive and most famous examples of guilloché is made by Fabergé, world famous for their precious eggs. Inlay. In jewelry, inlay is an antique technique where stones or other contrasting material, like wood, is inlaid in metal. It can also be the other way around, where metal is inserted into stone or other materials. The key to a successful jewelry making process. There are some fundamental things that make a jewelry making process cost and time effective, with the best outcome in terms of beauty and functionality. Let's look at them together. The most successful jewelry companies all have a tight collaboration between the design department, the people who supply the material, who make the prototypes, and who will eventually produce the jewels in quantities. This way, any potential problems are caught at an early stage, and designs can be made optimized from every aspect. Design, usually the person in charge of the design department or a specific project, needs to follow up on the progress throughout the entire prototyping process, with a frequency that works for all parts. This is the only way that you can monitor that the timeline is held. And if technical problems occur along the way, requiring a change in design, you have the chance to tweak it as needed, making sure that the outcome is still beautiful and in line with what you wanted. Any new material and prototypes should ideally be tested before going into production. If there is an issue with your jewel, you'll want to find out before producing numbers. What to think about when you work as a designer for a company. When you start a new position with a company, make sure you understand exactly what's expected of you from the very beginning, and if they want you to be part of the jewelry making process. If they want you part of the process, make sure you understand how it works, also in terms of timeline, and make sure you follow it. Timeline is key for any commercial businesses. The implications of being late can be devastating, and the costs huge for the company. And for you, it can cost you your job. If they want you part of the process, make sure you get to see the facilities, in-house and with any outside vendor, to get a good introduction to what they can do. Even if your responsibilities as a designer with a company doesn't require you to be part of the actual jewelry making process, you might still want to ask the possibility to consult with their jewelry makers and engineers for some technical feedback, and with their sourcing department about materials that you're interested in. You'll learn a lot from it and will be able to design more effectively for the company that way. What to think about when producing your own collection. If you want to produce your own line but don't have the connections yet, then the gem fairs is the best place to find vendors who can produce the jewelry for you. Meet with several different vendors before you begin. Check who can give you the best quality and price. And if you can, check their reputation. Let vendors do what they're specialized in and are really good at. This way you have the best odds of getting a good result. Even if it means getting different vendors to do different things, you'll save a lot of time and effort this way. If you can, go and visit your vendors' factories or workshops. It's key for you to understand what they can do and what their limitations are. Ask questions, make sure you get the answers you need. Once you've identified your vendors and have agreed on a timeline and cost, you're ready to start the jewelry making process. At this point, it's a good idea to follow the same procedures as the big jewelry companies. Be clear, be present, agree on touch points. You need to be on top of it. Never ever just assume that things are running smoothly. They rarely are. It's next to impossible to protect yourself from people copying your designs. But if you work with reliable vendors who want to continue to do business with you, they won't do anything to jeopardize it. Even if you think that it's obvious that the designs are yours and can't be reproduced by someone else, it might not be clear to others unless you specify it. Make sure your sketches have the necessary copyright information, and if you can, get some legal advice before you begin. Last but not least, unless you create your own jewelry from design to the finished pieces all by yourself, you're working with others to make it all come together. Having good work ethics, showing and expecting respect and professionalism is key to any successful collaboration.